Alright, so let's go ahead and jump over to the arms. There's really three major areas of the arm. There's going to be the inner arm, or the inner upper arm, which I'm doing right now, and then the shoulder, which is going to kind of go over the upper arm quite a bit. It's going to hang down past the shoulder, and then the forearm. And it made most sense to me to start with the upper arm, just because of the fact that it's below everything else. So I don't have to I can build stuff up rather than try to build stuff in. It's a little bit harder to do that. Alright, so I turned on polygroups for my clipping brushes, just so I can get nice edges that I can later use for group loops if I want to. And a good thing to do if you're gonna start using groups with your clipping curves is you see here I've already used group loops to loop everything. But after you do that, if you're gonna start clipping it, you really should merge everything into one poly group. That way you don't have a bunch of messy fringes at the edge of your mesh that might interfere with the poly groups you're cutting. In case you don't cut enough, you'll leave a few groups over there on the edges. So just unify everything, make it all one poly group before you start cutting into it. Alright, and so I'm just adding some plating onto the top of the mesh I just created here. And I turned on back face masking on my masking brush to make sure that, it didn't, when I extracted it, it didn't extract on both sides of the mesh. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and clip around this, kind of following the shape of the mesh below it. Alright, so now we can go on to the tricep area. And you can see I'm just using the upper arm that we already had from the concept to make all these pieces. Alright, I'm just going to clean up the mask a bit and extract it. I deleted the other side of the tricep. When I extracted it, I had symmetry on, but again, using the clipping brushes with the symmetrical mesh over the x-axis will give you some issues when you're cutting into it. Alright, and same as the bicep, I'm just going to go ahead and extract the an upper area of the tricep. And hopefully you can kind of start seeing some themes in the process by now. It's very repetitive, but it does, there's a reason it's repetitive. If I chose to do a different strategy for each object, the mesh would look completely just all over the place. So once you find a good way to go about the character or the object you're making, whatever it may be, just stick to it. Stick to what works. All right, and so I'm trying to cut this away here separately from my other cut. And the reason I'm trying to do this is I want the polygroups to be separated. So when I use group loops, I get that nice hard edge that you can see. Otherwise, it would just kind of soften itself and kind of merge together. All right, so I'm looking at this at an angle to get that cool angular look. And now I'm going to go ahead and start adding some tubing. And this tubing won't be the final tubing. In the end, we're going to go ahead and actually redo a lot of this tubing with the final details. But what it's helping me with right now is to inform decisions about what other objects I'm going to create around them. That's going to be kind of surrounding the whole thing, and just to see how it would look with tubing. I wanted to go ahead and put some kind of placeholder there, just to tell me what's going on. Alright, so I went ahead and dragged this to the other side just to, well, because it looked cool and I wanted more tubing. And you can see I kind of want to insert into this upper under shoulder area, which we're going to go ahead and create next. So I'm just going to go ahead and mask this off. And after I extract it, you'll never guess what I'm going to do with it next. Okay, so we have it extracted, and now just take a guess at how we're going to finish it. I dare you. Alright, so after we go ahead and clip all this, I'm going to use clip circle center to kind of make it look like it's made for the tubing. And just kind of use the move brush to move it into position a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and subdivide these a bit just so I can just get a better idea of what's going on with them. Kind of move them around, have more resolution to play with. Okay, so now I'm making a little insert here, like we saw in the fundamentals videos. So I'm just gonna go ahead and extract this part of the Z-spheres. So we have a nice nice little insert here, and then just create that ever so nice angle cut into it. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to go ahead and use a bit of the trim dynamic brush to cut into the edges here. I wanted to kind of alleviate some of this 90-degree angle stuff that I have going on. So, and you notice this brush, this trim dynamic brush, is really, really successful at just breaking up a 90-degree edge into like a 45-degree edge or whatever you want it to be, really. It's really easy to cut into it. I wouldn't recommend using the H polish brush for this. It'll give you a lot of problems. But you can see I'm using it here, but that's already because I've used the trim dynamic to kind of define exactly how I want that to go. But again, the trim dynamic isn't really the best tool for getting a smooth result, but it gives you more. It gives you a more accurate result to the angles and overall shape that you want. But to clean it up, you should really use the H polish brush. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the shoulder pads now. And you can see I'm using the planar flatten brush to kind of push down all this extra, the overplating, so I can create the under piece. But you can see right now when I'm working on this, I didn't really realize it at the time, but the overall shoulder gets a little bit flat. You'll kind of see this. You notice in the concept mesh, the shoulder pad had a really nice circular, almost spherical feel to it. And when I used the planar flatten brush to get under this, it kind of ruined that effect. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do this piece twice, but I think it's important to see the process either way. And it was actually after this this creation of the shoulder pad that I had to come up with a new way to make my fundamental meshes to extract from. And so in the next one, I'll go ahead and use just a standard polysphere. And then that'll kind of influence me to use more fundamental meshes in order to extract from. But this is still really good. It's still a good process. And you should just really use whichever process works for the problem at hand. So I'm not really worrying too much about the overall shape, because I can use the move brush to realign all that stuff. Okay, so this is more of a archaic way of getting that effect of a plate that actually consists of multiple plates. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and selected the outside of this mesh right here. And then I've extracted a really small piece right here, you see. What I'm going to go ahead and do is inflate it a bit. And then kind of use the move brush to just make it a little bit bigger than everything else. Again, a lot of this stuff was really problem solving and figuring out which technique worked best for each situation. And I really only used this technique once because it was a really long process, but it should be helpful in some situations where our other technique of using edge loops would not work. So I'm going to go ahead and extract this next piece out of here. All right, and I'm going ahead and just using Shift S to throw those down to the canvas so I can see what the final result I'm trying to get will be. All right, so now we can go ahead and clip this all the way through. And so you can see I did actually do a few parts, more than once. And I did the arms more than once as well, and that was actually edited out for time reasons. But it's really good to note that if something's not working, you just have to keep on trying new things and figuring out, okay, this doesn't work. What else can I try? What else will make this this conform to what I already have and the what I already have and I already like. You want to kind of make everything unified in that way. So it's kind of a constant struggle trying to figure out what'll work, and eventually you'll find out once you get far enough into the mesh, or into the character, I should say. It has has some personality, so we'll just call it a character. Once you get far enough into it, you really start to understand exactly what will work for the character, and what won't, and the process will get faster and faster as you go through it. So this is actually the second time I've gone through the forearm. Because the first one didn't look as great as it should have. So we can go ahead and just cut that out. You can see we get we're starting to get very, very clean results. And what I'm doing is I went ahead and I'm using remesh all to kind of get a very blurred version of the forearm, and then I'm using the Z project brush to kind of average out areas that I want to extract. And the reason I started doing this was because sometimes you notice when I was extracting from my concept meshes, I was getting a really sometimes they were folding in on each other, the meshes that I was getting. But also another big problem was I kept having to get rid of the edge polygroups from the extraction, because I had to, after I group loop them, I would have to unify them so I could get rid of all the floating geometry that was just kind of stray polygons out there that you've seen kind of floating around. And that was something that I didn't really want. So I tried out a few new methods to see what worked, and this one I found worked the best was to just remesh it and then kind of make it look so make the mesh conform as close as possible to the concept mesh. And then I would just use my masking, extracting, and cutting tools. Alright, so I'm just going around all the edges and clipping this guy out. And actually what I've done here is after I clipped it, I had polygroups on for my clipping. So I went ahead and unhid everything, or hid everything but the top, and then re-extracted it so I could have really clean edges there. So it's kind of a multi-part process, but it gives you something that you can work with a lot more later on. So it's a good step, and it only takes a few more minutes to push out the new mesh. And you'll notice that I'm working. I've always said, work from the center of the character and build it up outwards to give that illusion of depth. And the reason I'm kind of starting with the outer parts of the forearm is because I didn't quite know what I wanted to go on the inside yet. And it would have been kind of a struggle to figure that out before I went into this. So what I did was I just went ahead and worked from the outside to the inside, and but having an understanding that, okay, there is going to be something under this. Most of it's going to be the guy's forearm, obviously, but there's going to be something in between that that will make this forearm feel like one real big piece of armor. So it was just something I had to keep in mind. It's a little bit hard to work backwards like this, but in some instances it may be a bit easier. But definitely, if you have the option to work from the bottom or the core of the mesh and work outwards, it really is something that will help streamline the process. So again, I'm just kind of following the concept mesh that I have. Now I'm kind of making way for these exhaust vent things that I put in the concept mesh. And the clip circle center was the best way to go about allowing for that area to exist. That's the brush I used. And this is going to be a really difficult part eventually. Getting all the gun stuff to integrate into the forearm and make it look like it's one piece and it's not just kind of the gun was inserted as an afterthought. So that's something to keep in mind. You really want everything to look like it has a purpose. There's a reason for it being there, not just really cool details. Cool details can be cool, but they should also look functional. I remember when I started doing hard surface stuff, I would just make overall decent total shapes, and then for my details, I would just stamp on a bunch of just random blocks and doodads and stuff that didn't really look like they served any purpose at all. It just kind of looked like I had stopped caring at that point and just stamped everything on. So it goes a long way to put a little bit more effort into the details and give the illusion that they have some function. It really does help. Now, so how I have almost all of the outer pieces of the forearm done. So I have them all on hidden, so I can actually use each piece to inform my new meshes that I'm making. And you can see here I'm starting to use that edge loop function. Really cool. Inflate that down and give us a nice mechanical hard-edged look. And you can see when I have the concept mesh hidden, you can totally tell that I'm starting from the outside and working in, because a lot of the it's basically a holy mesh. There is no core to it, and you can totally tell. You can see right through it. All right, so again, you can see how smooth of a mesh I'm really using here to get my extractions. For this particular smooth mesh, what I just did was I unhid all my final piece of the mesh that I had so far, and just kind of moved this smoother mesh into position to kind of align with them, so I could make my extractions a bit easier. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and actually just clip this straight over and see how it looks. And I think it turns out pretty well. Instead of having to follow the curve around, it would have been a bit of a struggle to do that. Alright, so now we'll move on to the back of the hand area, kind of. And you'll notice during the creation of all of these, I've really kept in mind that this thing is not a statue and it has to move. So you'll see like the front where the thumb is, that kind of the wrist area right there that we're focused on right now. The back of the hand, and actually the forearm part of the armor that's on the palm of the hand. All of these things are separate objects, so when he moves his hand, they will kind of rotate and rotate around a pivot to allow him to move his hand, so it's not stuck in some little forearm cave. And that's really something to really keep in mind. We're not making a statue, we're making a character. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and clean up this mask here. In this particular instance, in the area above the back of the hand, I could have made this piece that I just created now first, and then made the piece on top of it after. It probably would have been a bit easier, but not by leaps and bounds, so it's not a huge deal. Alright, so I'm just trying to conform my curve, my clipping curve, to the mesh that I already have. And giving some area. I'm thinking that these areas that I've cut in, the little hole in the wrist and the hole in kind of the upper forearm area, that's going to be where the pivot is that allows these areas to move. So I'm going to put a little detail in there. I'm not quite sure what yet, but that will certainly be figured out. Alright, so now I'm really going to start working, or focusing, I should say, on the, I'm going to start building it in. I'm going to start moving inwards from what I've already created. And what I'm trying to do here with creating all these inner pieces is, first of all, I need to make sure that there's no holes in the forearm armor. So if I unhit everything, including all these kind of template meshes that you see, am I going to be able to see through the forearm? And if the answer is yes, then we need to go and fix that. And so I'll constantly unhide all of my, like you see I have the concept mesh visible here, but I would go ahead and hide that and then see, okay, is there any holes here? Yes? Okay, let's plug it. And I just start plugging holes with meshes. And these meshes don't need to be too intricate because really their function, most of their function is to plug holes. So they don't need to be too intricate. Of course, like the one we're making right here will be seen a bit more than some of the other meshes that will be under there. But again, it's not going to be as seen as some of the, for example, the piece right below it. And you can see the mesh that I'm creating right here is both an inner and an outer piece. So, I mean, it's not like I'm creating the under meshes and saying, well, they're not going to be seen. I can just totally destroy them and make them hideous. I'm not doing that. I'm still giving them care, but I'm not polishing the surface as much as I would for the outer pieces because it won't be seen. And you can see this area is kind of a hinged area also, just in case he rotates his arm in that way that would need this place to be able to bend. Alright, so now I'm kind of going into the broader strokes of the inside. And eventually, once I get in enough, what I'll go ahead and do is just create a nice, wholly cylindrical thing that would almost act as padding, I guess, for the forearm. That would, if there were any holes left, which I don't think there would be, it would plug those. It would not allow anybody to see through the forearm. And it just kind of gives us that beefiness. It'll add to that illusion that we've so often talked about. And you can see I haven't really placed anything under as well, like any of the gun stuff or the gun itself. And I'm just going to put a placeholder in there in a moment for a while until we get to the actual details. And I'm just trying to get that edge detail that we've been doing. And so now I'm using the trim hole brush to kind of pull out and then push back in a circular area that will allow me to place some cylinders in there later that can kind of pop out. Okay, so now I'm making the inner piece of the palm area, the forearm palm area, that junction. And after I group loops, I'm just going to go ahead and do some clipping. And I've mentioned it before, but I'm sure by now you've probably noticed the angle that I use for my kind of overall shape direction changes is pretty much the same every time. I'm not sure if that's a habit or if it's just well, I mean, I'm sure it is a habit, but it's something that I like to do that, and I think that using kind of the same ideas over and over helps really to unify a character. So that's why you'll notice that I have a lot of cylindrical areas. I have a lot of holes. I'm going to have a lot of tubing in between those areas. And then just a lot of nice overall shapes. And you can see now I'm doing the shoulder again. This is going to be the final correct shoulder. And I've started from a not a Z-sphere, a polysphere, one of the default tools that comes with 3ds Max. ZBrush, and it's basically just a cube that has been subdivided several times, so it's spherical. And the reason I'm using that is not only because it has the correct shape that I kind of want, this overall spherical shape, but it also will give me a very, very, very clean extraction. And that's really what I want. I want to keep these extractions as clean as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and clip out all these areas. And you can see that or maybe you can't see right now, but I can tell you that I have the polygroup function enabled on my clipping brushes. And throughout the entire character, I'm pretty much going to have this enabled, although at times you won't be able to see it. But that's for good reason. The reason that I have it enabled the entire time is I'm going to spend a lot of time manipulating the edges of all of these plates, and I want to have really easy access to them. And one way to have easy access to them is to separate them by polygroup. So I can just go ahead and select the surrounding meshes and select these. And so now you can see how useful that is to have the edges enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and use my edge loop trick to kind of get a really sharp edge and then just inflate this in. Okay, so I'm going back to my oblong sphere, and I'm just going to create the next piece, the next under area. So I'm just going to go ahead and mask it off and extract. And you really got to pay attention which way is the easiest to extract. Inner or outer. For this one I chose inner just because of the fact that the template mesh that I'm using to extract this from, the template sphere, is snugged right against the mesh that I just created. So I really want to push that in. And you'll notice that the most that you can extract at, or the thickest you can extract at, is a value of 1. That doesn't mean that you can't get thicker extractions. And the way you do that is you'll notice that when you extract, you'll have polygroups. And so what you do is you go ahead and hide all of the polygroups except for the outside area or the inside area, whichever side you want to make bigger. And then you just use the inflate deformation tool to make that area bigger. And then when you unhide everything, you'll have a much larger edge area. So that can be pretty useful. I actually used that a few times during the creation of this character. And now I'm kind of creating my cylindrical inlet. And that's just going to be, it's not going to be a hole, it's just a placeholder to put a detail later on. And so now I'm just creating a few little detail meshes. Just a few, not going to go too in-depth with this. Because I want to have, for the most part, I want to have all of my base mesh done before I start adding in details, and I want to kind of add details throughout the mesh. That way my details don't change the further I get into the process. Because you'll be able to notice. You won't know exactly what you notice, but you'll feel that something's off. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and create this little mesh now that kind of mimics some of the other plating we've made. Let me go ahead and clean up the mask a little bit. And you'll notice when I started doing these kind of 3 circle details, I started using the mask circle center brush instead of just the masking brush itself. And now I'm using more of the masking brush. And it's a good idea to kind of, if you have multiple ways to do something, you should try both of them out and see which one works best. And eventually I found out that the masking just with the pen works best because you can make all of the circles the same size without much effort. So that's the way I continue to do that. Alright, so really just, this is the home stretch for the arm. I'm just going to go ahead and create this shoulder, this elbow area. And this is pretty much going to be the last mesh. The elbow area is going to change a little bit too, but I don't know that yet. But I will, eventually. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this area out and see how it looks. And most of these areas are still subject to change. I don't know whether or not I'm going to change them yet. I have to look at them in the fullest context. But it's important to keep that in mind. Nothing is set in stone. If something sucks, we can always change it and make it cool. It's the cool thing about doing 3D and making your own stuff. You can always change it. You can always make it better. You can always improve it. But yeah, I think this is the last piece. So we can go ahead and move on to the legs now.